What happens when a racist cop punches an elderly black woman in front of a crowd? You would think no one would dare challenge him, right? But when her son walks in, everything changes. The tension builds, and what unfolds will shock you. This isn't just about a punch. It's about justice, power, and the unexpected twist that comes when the right person steps in. Stick around to see how this one ends. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this one ends. Gloria Thompson was the kind of woman who commanded respect without having to say a word. At 65 years old, she had seen the worst that the world could throw at her. Born and raised in the heart of the city, Gloria had spent her life teaching, guiding, and standing up for what was right, even when others turned their backs. She wasn't one to shy away from difficult situations, especially when it came to injustice. Her demeanor was calm, almost serene. But when it came time to speak out, she did so with the force of someone who had lived through it all and knew the cost of silence. She was a pillar of her community, the kind of person who was always ready to lend a helping hand or a wise word, but never afraid to stand firm when needed. Officer Rick Burns, on the other hand, was a man who had learned to use his badge like a weapon. He had been with the police department for over a decade, and with each passing year, his arrogance grew. Burns had developed a reputation for treating people with utter disrespect, especially people of color. To him, the badge was more than just a uniform. It was a symbol of control, of superiority. He thought his position made him untouchable, and he used that power to dominate those who crossed his path. Burns didn't care who he hurt or humiliated, as long as he was in charge. It was on this ordinary afternoon that Gloria found herself walking through the mall parking lot. She wasn't in a hurry, just another trip to the store. But as she passed by, she noticed something unsettling. Officer Burns was pulling over a young black woman. The situation seemed routine at first, but as Gloria looked closer, she could see that it wasn't. Burns was yelling at the woman, his tone harsh and dismissive. The woman in the car looked nervous, visibly shaken as if she were being treated unfairly. Gloria couldn't ignore it. Something wasn't right. Gloria couldn't stand by any longer. She saw the young woman in the car flinch as Officer Burns leaned in closer, his finger wagging in her face. Gloria's blood started to boil, but she kept her cool. She wasn't about to let this slide, not today. "Is everything all right here, officer?" Gloria asked, her voice calm but firm. Burns shot a look over his shoulder, his eyes narrowing when he saw who it was. "It's under control," he replied sharply, his tone dripping with condescension. "I've got this, Chief." He was trying to brush her off, but Gloria wasn't going to let him. She'd been through too many fights to let something like this slide, especially when it was so clear that the officer was abusing his position. Gloria didn't back down. She stepped forward, her posture commanding respect. "I don't think you've got it under control," she said, her voice unwavering. "This woman looks scared, and your tone isn't helping." Burns scoffed. "What are you going to do about it, huh? You think you can tell me how to do my job?" It was the arrogance in his voice that made Gloria's blood run colder. The way he spoke to her, to this woman, as though he were above everyone else. She knew she had to step in. She couldn't let this injustice go unchallenged. She could feel the tension mounting in the air. Passers-by were starting to notice. Some whispered, others pulled out their phones. The scene was becoming more than just a simple traffic stop. "I'm not telling you how to do your job," Gloria said, her voice calm, but with an undeniable edge. "I'm just saying this situation is escalating for no reason. You don't need to treat her like that." For a moment it seemed like Burns might back off, but his pride wouldn't let him. He raised his voice again, this time louder. "You think you're better than me. You think you can tell me how to handle this. You people." And then, without warning, it happened. The slap. Burns moved closer, his face twisted in fury, and he slapped the woman across the face. It happened so fast, it was as if the world froze. The sound of the slap echoed through the air. People gasped, and the silence that followed was deafening. Gloria stood still for a moment, shocked, but then her instincts kicked in. She couldn't let this pass. Not for the young woman, and not for herself. "Did you just slap her?" Gloria asked, her voice shaking with anger but still steady. The words came out slowly, as if she were trying to process what had just happened. Burns turned around to face her. He was unfazed. "Yeah, I did. What are you going to do about it?" Gloria's heart pounded, but she held her ground. "You've just assaulted this woman, officer. You're not above the law. You don't get to do this." At that moment, everything changed. Gloria wasn't just another bystander. She wasn't just another citizen questioning a cop. She was the chief of police, and she wasn't going to let Burns walk away from this. The crowd around them had begun to stir. Some were shocked. Some were starting to record the incident, but all eyes were on them now. Gloria could feel the weight of their gaze on her, but she couldn't back down. "Did you know who I am?" Gloria asked calmly, but her eyes were full of authority. Burns blinked in confusion, clearly thrown off by her question. "What, are you some sort of activist?" he scoffed. "No," Gloria said, her eyes narrowing. "I'm the chief of police." Burns took a step back, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. His face turned pale as he processed her words. "Wait, you're the chief?" His voice faltered. "That's right," Gloria said. Her stance was strong now. Everything had shifted. She pulled out her phone and called for backup, her voice steady as she spoke to the dispatcher. "This is Chief Gloria Thompson. I need Officer Burns detained immediately. He's just assaulted a civilian." The weight of her words hit Burns like a ton of bricks. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control. The power had shifted, and he could no longer hide behind his badge. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder, and Burns was visibly sweating now. His bravado had completely disappeared, replaced with panic. He was shaking his head, trying to explain. I didn't mean to. I was just—" But Gloria didn't let him finish. "No," she interrupted. "You don't get to apologize now. You've crossed the line." She turned to the crowd, her voice strong. "This is what happens when we don't hold people accountable for their actions. You see this? This is the kind of abuse we're fighting against." Within minutes, backup arrived. Officers stepped in and quickly placed Burns in handcuffs. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Burns was led away, his face red with embarrassment. Gloria turned to the woman who had been sitting in the car, still shaken but now visibly relieved. "Are you okay?" she asked, her tone softening. The young woman nodded slowly, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Chief. I didn't know what to do. I thought nobody would help me." Gloria smiled, her compassion shining through. "No one deserves to be treated like that," she said. "Not on my watch." The scene that had started as an ordinary traffic stop had ended in an extraordinary way. A crowd of people stood watching as the young woman was freed from the fear that had been holding her back. The moment had turned into a public stand for justice, and Gloria Thompson wasn't done yet. The tension was thick in the air. Gloria stood tall, watching Officer Burns as he tried to regain his composure. His arrogance had completely melted away, replaced by a palpable sense of fear. For the first time, he wasn't in control. The woman he had humiliated was no longer trembling in fear. She was free. And Gloria, the chief of police, wasn't about to let him off the hook. "Do you know what you've done?" Gloria's voice was unwavering. She wasn't shouting, but the authority in her tone made everyone around her hold their breath. The crowd had gone eerily silent. All eyes were on Burns, waiting for him to react. Burns stood there, wide-eyed, his hands trembling. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but nothing came out. The reality of the situation was sinking in. This wasn't just a routine incident anymore. This was bigger than him, bigger than the badge he wore. "I didn't mean to," Burns started, but Gloria cut him off, her voice cold and firm. "Number. You don't get to make excuses," she said, stepping closer to him. "You just assaulted a civilian. You just abused your power." The crowd murmured, and some of them started recording the confrontation. People were beginning to realize they were witnessing something monumental. Not just the fall of one officer, but the moment when a system of abuse was being confronted head-on. "I'm the chief of police, Burns," Gloria continued, "and I won't let this go. You're going to answer for this." At that moment, the power had shifted. Burns, once confident in his position, now looked like a man who realized he was out of options. He was no longer the officer with authority. He was a man being held accountable for his actions. The backup officers arrived, and the mood shifted. The weight of the situation was clear. Gloria, still standing firm, didn't hesitate. She stepped aside slightly, signaling to the officers. "Take him in," Gloria ordered, and the backup officers immediately moved in. Burns was placed in handcuffs without resistance. His face was a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and defeat. The crowd watched as he was led away, his reputation shattered in an instant. But Gloria wasn't done yet. The crowd, some of whom had been hesitant at first, now began to cheer. They had witnessed something that was all too rare in law enforcement: accountability. Gloria turned to the young woman who had remained silent through it all. She could see the relief in her eyes, but also the lingering fear. "You're free," Gloria said, walking toward her. "Are you okay?" The woman nodded slowly, wiping away the tears that had been welling up in her eyes. "Thank you, Chief. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Gloria smiled, placing a comforting hand on the woman's shoulder. "No one should ever have to feel like that." "Not on my watch." The young woman's voice was barely a whisper, but it was filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," Gloria said gently. "Just live your life without fear. That's all that matters." The crowd continued to watch, some clapping softly, others just standing in awe. They had witnessed a pivotal moment, not just the fall of one officer, but the rise of a new sense of justice. Gloria's decision to step in, to confront the abuse of power, had shown them that change was possible. But as Gloria turned to leave, her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, glancing at the message. It was from her deputy. A full investigation had just been launched into Officer Burns, and the department was now under review for other cases of misconduct. This wasn't just a local issue anymore. The truth was coming to light, and Gloria knew this was just the beginning of a much larger conversation. As the police van drove off, taking Officer Burns into custody, the crowd slowly began to disperse. The tension in the air had lifted, but Gloria knew this wasn't over. She had done what was right in the moment, but she could already feel the ripples of what this moment would mean. This was only one officer, one incident, but it could be the spark that started a larger movement. Gloria was walking toward her car, deep in thought, when her phone buzzed again. It was from her deputy. She had been expecting updates, but this message was different. It was the investigation report, and what it revealed was nothing short of jaw-dropping. Gloria's fingers trembled slightly as she read the report. It confirmed her suspicions about Officer Burns. He wasn't just a rogue cop with a temper. Burns had been involved in multiple incidents of misconduct, allegations of racial profiling, excessive force, and even serious complaints from other officers about his behavior had been brushed aside for years. But this slap, it was the tipping point. What was even more shocking was the discovery that higher-ups in the department had been covering for Burns, sweeping his actions under the rug for years. The very same people who were supposed to uphold the law had been complicit in enabling him. Gloria couldn't believe it. She had suspected there was corruption within the department, but she never imagined it ran this deep. The report went on to detail several other cases where Burns had acted outside the law, times when he had used his power to intimidate, threaten, and abuse the very people he was sworn to protect. And it wasn't just Burns. The investigation revealed that a pattern of racism and abuse of power existed in parts of the department. The news spread like wildfire, and by the time Gloria stepped into the department the next morning, she could already feel the weight of it all. Officers were whispering, the media was everywhere, and she knew she was at the center of it. But this wasn't a story about one bad cop. It was about an entire system that needed to change. Gloria felt a mix of anger and resolve wash over her. She had thought Burns's actions were an isolated incident, but now she knew better. The system was broken, and if she didn't do something about it, the next officer who crossed the line would have an even easier time getting away with it. She called for an emergency meeting with her top officers, knowing this would be the moment that determined the course of action. She couldn't afford to back down now, not when she had the chance to root out corruption from within. The meeting room was tense, filled with both familiar faces and new ones. Gloria stood at the front, the weight of the situation hanging over her. "I've seen the report," she started, her voice steady but forceful. "And let me be clear, this doesn't stop with Burns. This is about a pattern. This is about accountability, and it's about changing how we operate. We're going to have to make some difficult decisions, but I'm not backing down." There was a long pause. The room was quiet, and Gloria could feel the tension in the air. The department's leadership had failed its citizens, but now it was her turn to fix it. One of the senior officers in the room, Captain Daniels, stood up. He had been a part of the department for over 20 years, and everyone respected him. "Gloria," he said slowly, his voice unsure, "you know this is going to get messy. We have allies in this department, but we also have enemies. There's a lot of people who don't want change." Gloria looked at him and nodded. "I know, but I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to fix this. And if that means cleaning house, then so be it." The realization began to settle in for the other officers. They knew Gloria meant business. She wasn't afraid to make the hard calls. But as the meeting ended and Gloria left the room, she knew this was only the beginning. The real battle wasn't going to be with Burns or the officers who were already corrupt. It was going to be with the system that had allowed this behavior to fester for so long, and the public wasn't going to sit idly by. Gloria was already starting to see the backlash from some of her colleagues, but she was ready. This wasn't just about fixing one bad apple. It was about transforming a system that had been broken for too long. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Gloria was now the center of attention, not just in her city, but across the nation. The investigation into Officer Burns, as well as the corrupt practices within her own department, had ignited a firestorm. The city was split. Some hailed her as a hero, while others saw her actions as a threat to the established order. But Gloria didn't care about the politics. She knew she had made the right choice, and deep down, she knew the people who mattered, the ones who had been silenced by the very system meant to protect them, would stand with her. A few weeks after the arrest, Gloria called a press conference. It was time to address the public, to explain what had happened, and to share her plans for reform. The room was packed. Journalists from all over the country had gathered, eager to hear her thoughts. As Gloria walked to the podium, her gaze swept over the crowd. She felt the weight of the moment, but she also felt something else, determination. This was her moment to show the world that change was possible. "Good afternoon," Gloria began, her voice calm but resolute. "I stand before you today not just as the chief of police, but as someone who believes in the power of accountability. What happened to Officer Burns was a necessary step, but it is not the end. It's just the beginning of a much larger conversation about what we, as a police department, need to do to rebuild trust." There was a slight pause as she let the words sink in. She could see the skeptical faces in the crowd, but she wasn't deterred. "We are launching a complete overhaul of this department," she continued. "Every officer will undergo retraining. Every incident will be reinvestigated, and those who have taken advantage of their power will be held accountable." The room went silent, and for a moment, Gloria thought the journalists might protest. But instead, they listened. She was speaking their language now. They understood that this wasn't just talk. This was action. As the press conference came to a close, Gloria was approached by a local activist, a woman who had been fighting for police reform for years. The woman smiled at her, and for the first time, Gloria saw the gratitude in her eyes. "I didn't think this would ever happen," the activist said. "You've set the example. You've given us hope." Gloria felt a lump form in her throat, but she didn't let it show. This was more than just a victory for her. It was a victory for the people. For every person who had ever been wronged by the system, Gloria was showing them that change was possible. But it wasn't all praise. There were still those who fought against her reforms, those who wanted things to stay the same, who wanted to keep their power. Gloria knew the road ahead would be tough. She had made powerful enemies within her department, and even some of the higher-ups in the city government were skeptical of her bold approach. But Gloria wasn't worried. She had the people on her side. She had shown them that standing up to injustice wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. She had proven that one person's courage could spark a movement that would change everything. Weeks passed, and the department began to change. There were meetings, training sessions, and an overwhelming push for a better system. The corrupt officers who had been exposed were either arrested or fired, and a new culture of transparency was slowly being built. And then Gloria received a letter from the young woman she had helped on that fateful day. In the letter, the woman thanked her for her bravery, for standing up for her when no one else would. She wrote about how she had been afraid of the police her entire life, but now she saw a glimpse of hope. Gloria sat in her office, reading the letter, and for the first time in a long while, a smile spread across her face. This was why she had fought so hard, This was the reason she had risked everything, so that people like the young woman would know they had a voice, and that their voices mattered. The battle wasn't over. There were still changes to be made, still injustices to right. But Gloria Thompson had done something that no one thought was possible. She had taken the first step toward a new future, one where justice wasn't just a word, but a reality. As the weeks went by, the message spread beyond the department. Gloria's story was shared in news outlets across the country, in activist circles, in city councils. People began to realize that accountability didn't come from just words. It came from action. It came from the kind of leadership that was willing to take risks, even when it seemed impossible. But the most important message Gloria shared with the world was this: never back down from doing what's right, no matter the cost. This was the beginning of a larger movement, and Gloria was at the forefront, leading with courage, conviction, and a heart that truly cared about the people she was sworn to protect. As the dust began to settle, Gloria stood at the forefront of a battle that had changed the entire city. The reforms she had fought for were being implemented, and the police department was no longer the same. The work was far from over, but Gloria's impact was undeniable. The courage she had shown had sparked a movement, not just in her department, but in the hearts of those who had been silent for far too long. People began to understand that accountability didn't come from just words. It came from action. The young woman, who had once feared the very system meant to protect her, now felt safe knowing that leaders like Gloria would stand up for her. Gloria's phone buzzed with messages of gratitude, some from her team, others from community members who had witnessed the transformation. She had become more than just a chief of police. She had become a symbol of change. But she knew the fight wasn't over. There were still battles to be fought, systems to dismantle, and prejudices to address. And that's where you come in. What about you? Are you willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult? Can you make a difference in your community? We can all take action. Whether it's speaking out against injustice, helping someone in need, or standing up to systems that don't work for everyone, we have the power to make a change. It starts with us. It starts with you. If you believe in justice, accountability, and equality, don't stay silent. Share this story. Comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe for more real stories that inspire action. Let's continue the conversation and keep fighting for what's right.